The world of the Darwin Incident is an interesting one. While it bears many similarities to our own, for the sake of its narrative and overall message, it has differences that set it apart from our world quite starkly. Of course, ignoring the chimpanzee in the room for a minute, the differences I'm referring to are much more slight in their execution. Everything moves faster in the Darwin Incident. Reactions are stronger. The advent of social media in the world is more, for lack of better words, aware on a global scale. The world of this narrative is one of unrest and conflict, where everyone is on edge and constantly demanding that you take a side of some sort. It's a version of the world that's derivative in concept, but in execution, the Darwin Incident manages to make it all feel fresh in its own way. At the center of this lies the series' protagonist, Charlie the Human-Z, who, in this much more active and attentive world, finds himself in a unique position within the main conflict of the narrative. Charlie's existence is the catalyst for this inherent difference between this world and our own, and the series does well to constantly put Charlie under this microscope unknowingly of his own creation, endlessly testing his ideology and challenging his philosophy. However, while in any other story, the remainder would be rather predictable, the Darwin Incident still manages to be a much more unique perspective on this tried and true concept. Charlie has a certainty of himself that he carries with him adamantly, and it's surprisingly unshakable, where typically the conflict in the series like this comes from that unstable perspective, towing the line between human and whatever creature of the week the protagonist happens to be mixed with. Charlie is Charlie. He's both nothing but himself and everything at the same time, and that makes sense to him. And the goal of this video is to make that make sense to you as well. Charlie's philosophy is the crux of the Darwin Incident's narrative and his greatest strength as a character, with the majority of the conflict in the series being pushed forward by the other characters' propensity to misunderstand this philosophy. So join me as we go over the first 6 episodes of the Darwin Incident anime, exploring a multitude of interactions and clashes to avoid making the same mistakes as the characters, as we attempt to explain the Darwin Incident's biggest misunderstanding. Before we can identify the misunderstanding in question, we first need to establish exactly what's being misunderstood. We need to understand Charlie's philosophy, which I believe can be broken down into 2 parts, starting off with his value of life. Odd word choice aside, Charlie's perception of the environment around him contributes in no small part to the way he interacts with the world and the people surrounding him. Episode 1 presents the first of these interactions, a debate between Charlie and Ozzy, a recurring character who's rather outspoken against Charlie's veganism. The debate presents an interesting scenario. On the basis that all life is equal and that vegans are vegans because of an innate desire to preserve and protect life, if a diseased mouse was unavoidably about to bite Charlie and he had a gun, would he shoot the mouse to protect himself or let the mouse live at the cost of his life? While admittedly a flawed scenario, the purpose is clear. Ozzy sees veganism as a very black and white philosophy due to the radicals in this universe, and because of this, he sees this hypothetical as a way to make them face their own hypocrisy. Charlie admits that he would kill the mouse to protect himself, leaving Ozzy pleased with his perceived victory, before Charlie then clarifies that if it was Ozzy himself with the disease, he wouldn't have a problem killing him either. This is the perfect answer for Charlie, and upon learning of his true philosophy in future episodes, it makes even more sense. In episode 3, we're introduced to the concept of one. To some, this can be seen as a throwaway line, but in the context of this discussion, it is the center of my thesis. When Charlie is pit up against Max, the leader of the Animal Liberation Alliance, he's challenged once again about his beliefs, this time in himself. Max in the scene is attempting to manipulate Charlie by planting the seed that he's special, the most special as a matter of fact, and that being like Charlie must be isolating and lonely. Charlie, though, isn't receptive to any of this, because in his eyes, there really is no such thing as special, because in a world where all life is equal, all life is one. This scene was very illuminating to me when I first saw it, on the grounds that it's even more indicative of Charlie's unique position in this world. He is special and yet chooses to live a humble, grounded life because that's infinitely more interesting and comfortable for him. In the dinner scene where it's emphasized that Charlie and his family are remarkably normal, in the forest meetup scene where Charlie expresses his natural curiosity to Lucy, it all makes sense in the context that Charlie doesn't perceive himself as any better or any worse than any other being, saying, because all lives are worth the same, because all lives are the same. This is the crux of Charlie's philosophy and one of the areas in which he's most misunderstood. Charlie's story isn't one of tragedy where he's trying to find his place, but one where he's already sure of his place and is just feeling things out for the fun of it. But then, why? Why do all of this for a world that is constantly questioning you and making you question yourself? Well, that brings me to the second part of Charlie's philosophy, his priorities, or lack thereof. Over the course of the Darwin Incident, we see Charlie put in a variety of situations, and we get a look into his thought process and how he measures his responses. Charlie individually is shown to not care about much because there's not a lot that can affect him. He doesn't even care about his own biological mother because he's never been able to build a connection with her. In his own words, she's just a being that gave birth to him, and yet, in spite of his lack of drive to go out of his way for himself, once he finds people that he clicks with, it's very interesting how far he'll go. In episode 4, we see Charlie questioning Lucy, his best friend and our deuteragonist, about stress. In particular, stress after a traumatic event. After hearing how omnipresent it is and how much it genuinely affects her, Charlie hunts down the 3 members of the ALA that broke into his house and attempts to hand them over to the police. Now, this is interesting, because so far in the series, this is the only time that Charlie has gone out of his way to put himself in a bad situation for the sake of others. And it just happens that these are people that he's had time to build bonds with. This scene is a confirmation that Charlie is capable of caring for others and that he's aware of his own capabilities. 2 very important things to keep in mind. Going all the way back to episode 1, there's a scene where Charlie saves a butterfly from a spider web, stating to his mother soon after that he took away the spider's food. This scene is important for understanding the wider context as to why Charlie does what he does. He's almost impulsively bound to help others if something bad is happening right in front of him. Keyword being right in front of him. The spider in this scene has likely killed hundreds of insects to stay alive, but Charlie doesn't care about those lives lost before or after the fact, simply the one he was able to save in the moment. It's the reason why Max is so certain that Charlie will stop Gare instead of just taking Lucy and escaping in the school shooting arc. Charlie's priorities are cut and dry once you've been given time to process and understand his philosophy. He values the freedom of choice, but he makes the personal choice to stop wrongdoing when it's happening right in front of him. If he's close with you personally, he'll go out of his way to keep you safe and show a very rare initiative. It's surprisingly simple and astoundingly human in a way most other narratives would reject. Charlie knows himself, and while the world is trying to learn him and break him down, he's holding firm, and that's really interesting. So how then does the world of the Darwin Incident misunderstand Charlie? The Darwin Incident is loaded with a wide variety of characters, each of them generally falling on one side or the other, but most importantly, having their own unique perspective on the conflict presented in the narrative, as well as Charlie as an entity. Most if not all of the characters in the series serve an express purpose. Some exist to act as a mouthpiece for certain groups, others are much more active players of the game, but one thing they all have in common, at least those that interact with Charlie, is their misunderstanding of Charlie's philosophy and his way of life. We covered Ozzy earlier, but he really does represent the overwhelming social zeitgeist that's constantly looming over Charlie, whether he cares about it or not. Ozzy is a mouthpiece for every average person in this world. He feels as though Charlie is a hypocrite, that maybe his beliefs of peace aren't as firm as he would like everyone to believe, that he's just a monkey, looking for any excuse to lash out. This is the perspective of general society at large, even Sheriff Phil, who can't help but remember an incident from 10 years preceding the series, where Charlie, feeling threatened, attacked a group of children that pushed him into the pool. Though one thing you can also take note of is that Charlie didn't gravely injure any of the children, merely defending himself and not going any further. Even at the age of 5, he still had enough autonomy to hold back, something that the sheriff never gave a second thought. The ALA misunderstands Charlie in a separate way, and honestly a much more interesting way. We touched on this a bit earlier, but Max views Charlie as an isolated being. He's stronger than a chimpanzee and smarter than a human, yet he lives in a world that denies him his autonomy, not even giving him basic human rights. In a way, Max is right, but it's a strength of Charlie's philosophy that he doesn't care about these things, a strength that Max doesn't fully understand, but something that he wants to explore because Charlie as a being intrigues him. The next step on the evolutionary ladder, and yet he's content with acknowledging every being is equal to himself. Such an interesting concept. How could a creature like Charlie ever be okay associating with humans? Gare is a character I've decided to save up until this point for a reason. Sometimes when I make videos like this, there's a very valid question that can come up. The question of author intent. Sure, you can make any idea sound cool with enough flowery wording and YouTuber editing, but what does any of it mean if the author simply wasn't trying to tell that kind of story in the first place? Gare is my evidence of author intent. He's a very intentionally designed foil to Charlie, and he represents the biggest misunderstanding of this narrative. He does everything to be an active player in the story, but he lacks so much of the fundamental understanding that even at his most important, the best thing Max could do with him was turn him into a mini-boss with a gun. Gare represents a character with the passion Max believes Charlie should have, but none of the special capabilities. He's an impressionable young man, obsessed with being on the right side of history, believing in a sunk cost fallacy that as long as he invests into this imaginary history, he'll be remembered as something more than a loser who did nothing and became nothing. He represents the very opposite of Charlie's philosophy, believing that Charlie has a responsibility to pick a side, his side, on the virtue of his very existence alone. He believes that this is Charlie's destiny. It's what he was born to do, and that he's wasting his potential by not doing it. He views Charlie as a special being, something different from everyone else, naturally deserving of more than what he feels he is. And to that, all Charlie can say is,
は何の代弁者でもない。ただの一匹の動物。ただのチャーリーだよ。
The Darwin Incident, or at least what I've seen of it so far, is an interesting study on humanity and understanding yourself. The series takes advantage of Charlie's understanding of his own philosophy and beliefs to present a variety of interesting scenarios where the characters have to tangle with their own ideologies, trying to push for their own agendas and goals, while also taking in and observing Charlie just as he does the same to them. Every character in the series has one interesting moment or another, and Charlie himself expresses glee in getting to know all of these different sides of humanity. It's a refreshing take on this concept, and it makes the series feel just that much more memorable. In a world where nobody can understand each other, Charlie is the one creature that understands himself. My name is Sean Sage, and thanks for watching.